Hi, everybody. Welcome to Hide and Seek. This is the first real episode of Hide and Seek, and I'm kind of excited about it. If this is your first time hearing about it, then you can go back to the introduction and just learn more about what Hide and Seek is actually about, or at least from my perspective. But basically, it's about my experience from hiding to seeking who I am emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, literally all the E's. So let's just jump into it. Today's topic is about perfectionism. I wanted to start with this topic because it has been a thing in my life from as far back as I can remember. And I don't know, I guess for me, it's still a thing that's part of my life that I'm not trying to hold on to anymore. So let's get into it. So for those that don't know, perfectionism is basically an extremely excessive high standard personally that influences the way we see ourselves. There's different types of perfectionisms, I guess. I was reading this article from a while ago. The article is a while ago, where they talked about two specific types of perfectionism. So they talked about societal perfectionism, which is more based on performance. So basically, people will value you more if you are perfect. And then there's another thing self perfectionism, which is more your internal desire to be perfect. I think both of these are really, really heavy in my life. I guess I'm trying not to call myself a perfectionist, but I kind of call myself a perfectionist still. But I deal with both societal pressures and self pressures. So with that being said, the downside of being perfectionist, right? Most people think a perfectionist is, somebody that just excels well or has that drive to excel well. But there's also hindrances to perfectionism. And those hindrances being more on the emotional, mental side of things. So societal pressures can lead to more depression and suicide, and self pressures, though it hasn't been solidified with the article that I read from a while ago, and maybe it has now. But that leads to more eating disorders. And with self-perfectionism, it's more of stress induced, right? So the less stressed you are, you're fine if you're a perfectionist. It's not that big of a deal. But the more stressed you are, then it can lead also to depression and anxiety or suicidal thoughts. So basically, perfectionism can kind of correlate to other mental health disorders, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and suicide. So how this relates to me is literally from as far back as I can remember. I think perfectionism started maybe when I was, but I noticed probably when I was in grade school. I strive to be perfect with grades and behavior and literally everything else. And I think that the origin of that came from my babyhooddom. That's not a word, but basically when I was a baby. So my story kind of began when I was just like everybody else, an infant, right? I was born to my birth parents, but they were young and had a lot of stuff going on themselves. And so I ended up being adopted by my paternal grandparents. I think that because of that, the adoption process, I think that if I had never known I was adopted, I might have been different? I'm not sure. But I think that all the time. So maybe that's exactly what I think. But because I knew it, I had this unwanted feeling like for a long time. So I think because I felt unwanted and nobody cared for me, and I can't say nobody cared for me, but just that the people that birthed me and were supposed to be my parents didn't care for me in the way that I thought that I needed at that time. I think I had this drive to be the best me possible so that people wouldn't leave me, so that like they would want me around and like want to be with me or take care of me or whatever, even as far back as a little kid. If I were the best me possible, which is basically the societal perfectionism or the societal pressure of like performance of if I did good, then people won't leave. And so because of that, I think I was like really fearful of literally just life and doing things, whether that's right or wrong. So I think that those like negative emotions of fear and being unwanted kind of shaped the way I viewed myself. And then perfectionism just really became like a standard for me. I think that vulnerability was kind of like an issue with me when it comes to perfectionism. So those that don't know, vulnerability is just the state of being like exposed or attacked, or it's basically like this exposing yourself really, but like with the possibility of being attacked or hurt, physically, emotionally, mentally. And it's also kind of like putting yourself in a position where others can hurt you, i.e. me doing this is quite vulnerable for me. There's different categories of vulnerability, and emotional vulnerability, I think, is where I struggled the most from as far back as I can remember. And that's just basically opening up to others and like sharing personal feelings and thoughts and experiences that may be painful to expose. And so the part of the hiding that I have done my whole life up until literally this point has been my perception that like emotional vulnerability is like a weakness. And I thought vulnerability in general was a weakness because I thought it took strength to like, stuff it and be strong and like do all of those things. I mean, you can be strong, but vulnerability is strong. But I just thought that it was showing strength versus displaying strength. So, I guess the first experience that I remember of perfectionism was in the 5th grade. So I had the best 5th grade teacher ever. It was her very first year. So we were her very first class. And I mean, she was so engaged, so enthusiastic, like all of these things. She was amazing. I learned so much about, I don't know, I guess just, I remember so much of like school stuff just from her teaching. And, I remember like being so hard on myself when we had projects. She was very much like a creative instructor. So she always had us like making projects or doing projects and stuff. And mind you, we were in the 5th grade. And so I was very used to like pencil and paper and like doing stuff that way. But she was very creative, and we loved her as a class for it. But I was really shy as a kid. I was quiet. I did the work. I made great grades. I mean, even in elementary, I think the lowest grade I had was like a mid-90s. And I was just always like nervous And if I didn't know something, I would get really, really nervous, hot and shaky and stuff. And I was like, oh man, how do I not know this? Especially if we were called in class. I was never the one to like raise my hand to answer a question. No, that's awkward. So when I became an adult, she wanted to meet up with her very first 5th grade class. She was coming into town and wanted to meet up with us. And I was obviously going to be there because I really enjoyed her as a teacher. And when she first saw me, you know how like we're hugging people, I'm seeing old classmates that I haven't seen in years, and she comes up to me and is like, "Oh my goodness, how is my beautiful anxious one?" And I was like, "Oh man." Like, what? And she was like, "You were always just so anxious as an individual. I always talk to your parents about trying to help you relax and get relaxed." And I was like, what? So this really has been like a lifelong thing. And when she said that, I was like, oh man, part of me wanted to like tear up because I was like, no, I didn't want that label. And then the other part of me was kind of just like, okay, so that is very true about me. I was pretty anxious. She ended up talking to me briefly about like, everything had to be like a certain way and had to be this. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, unfortunately, I'm kind of still like that. And she was just super encouraging. And that moment was like one of the best moments I had. But I think with like grade school and being back then, I didn't feel like I was ever good enough or I wasn't worthy. And I think that kind of drove the perfectionism in a way that was obviously unhealthy if there's individuals in your life that recognize it way more than you. I think moving on to like, even when I was okay. So when I was a kid, I also was in the modeling world, which my mom was always like, it was either pageants or modeling. But all the makeup that they do with pageants, I couldn't do that. So I just decided to put you in modeling. So I was in modeling from like probably the time I was like about 5 or 6, maybe 7, until I was like almost 30, which is kind of weird to say, but so I got fired when I was 7 years old, which was extremely funny to me because again, this perfectionist kid, I was like, I could do it all. I could do all these things. And I ended up getting fired because I was so tired and I was supposed to do this photo shoot with this, like, it wasn't a Walmart, but it was like a Walmart. But back then it was really popular. Definitely was not Walmart. But I was supposed to do ads for them, but I was supposed to be in a different city, a different state actually. And I was so tired. And my mom was not one of those moms to make me do it. She was definitely one of those moms that was backstage saying like, that's too much makeup. No, you need to take that. Oh no, her hair is not going to look like that. She was that type. But I was just doing photo shoots and pictures and just this and that when I was 7, and it was just crazy. But I didn't realize that even doing all of that was damaging me in a way that was unhealthy. Modeling can be fun, but then there's the critique part of it. Like everything about you is being critiqued, literally everything externally. Internally, not so much. It's more about I guess outwardly it is, which kind of seeps in inwardly, because then you start having this like inner critic, which I did. Definitely. I got fired when I was 7, and then I started back up when I was about 12 or 13, which is probably the worst time to start up as an adolescent because you don't even know who you are. You're still trying to figure out everything, like who am I? What type of friend am I? Like, excuse me, who you are as a person, like all of these things. And it's just really hard. And then being in a world that critiques you basically based off of everything you look, just based off of what you look like. So when I went back, my agent, who was pretty amazing, told me that, I would book jobs if I smiled more. Apparently I had a real bad version of RBF. And she told me that when I walk into a room, I need a smile. Well, shy me at the time was like, oh no, I don't want people looking at me, or, all of these things. And she was like, yes, you definitely have to smile when you walk to the room and be personable and all of this. And that's like the complete opposite of who I am as an individual. I am very introverted. So I'm the type that goes straight to the corner, sit there until you call on me. But in the modeling world, it's not like that. You would think that it would give you some like type of confidence to do this, but for me, it was a false confidence. Like I can perform. I could go into a room now and you would think that I'm extroverted, but I'm definitely not. And I think being a Black child at that time was very hard because there was a standard back then with what models should look like. I got critiqued all the time for not being like ethnic enough. And then when they needed a mixed kid, quote unquote, role, I wasn't white enough. So that was really hard. And it was having to, change my voice and have this like upbeat personality to show that I can be these things, when really on the inside I was just like, oh, this is not me, just to book a job. So then I think the inner critic of the modeling world kind of like substantiated like the perfectionism in me of like, I have to be this way, I have to look like this, I have to be like this, I have to. Currently I am natural, but for like literally all up until 2009, I straightened my hair, permed my hair, all to fit this like mold in the modeling world of like what they perceive a Black individual to be. It's not like that now. I see more diversity in that world now, but then it definitely was. It became like emotionally damaging for me, so much so that, I obtained like an eating disorder. And at the time, eating disorders were like glorified almost. They basically told us in the modeling world that we are a hanger for the designers. And, we have to be a certain bust and have a certain bust and waist and hip size, and the only way to achieve any of that in the time frame that was necessary was to like do it in the most unhealthy way possible. But then that kind of was like a double-edged thing for me, because of the emotional damage that I had from, just not feeling wanted, and then like other situations in my life that happened that I will talk about later on in the pod. I was like emotionally damaged, and the only way to like control anything that was happening in my life was to control what I ate, because nobody could force it into my mouth. Nobody could tell me when to do it, or, all of these things. And that's literally what I did from the time I was like 13 until I don't know. I think I fully quit like when I was about 28 or 29. I mean, I had moments where I would stop and like not like starve myself. Um but then, you know, after doing it for so long, this like gets into your head of like, oh no. This is like the only way you can control like what's happening in your environment. Um so not only did I have to look perfect in the modeling world, I just felt like it kind of just drove you to a certain way of like eating disorders. And then depression, because you're not enough. Like nothing was ever enough. And that wasn't necessarily the modeling world. That was just like that self-pressure of being a perfectionist. It's like nothing's ever enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not doing this enough. I'm not doing it fast enough. I'm not. So like just that worthlessness and not feeling good enough is just like a driving force behind perfectionism. Which now as I'm saying it is just like honestly way too exhausting. So with that feeling of like not being good enough and not being good enough and not being good enough, like as I move through adolescence, like dating obviously becomes a thing. Just like any teenager wants to date. But when I got into college, I ended up being in relationships that were completely unhealthy for me because I had a low self-esteem. My standard for relationships was quite low. I thought that like I was holding myself to a higher standard because I was like, oh man, I'm not going to let this happen in my relationships and I'm not going to deal with this and I'm not going to have this in my life. And actually I ended up having all the things I wasn't going to say happen to me. I just let it happen. And that literally had to do with like my self-worth. And then I think the saddest thing about it was that because I was a perfectionist, I wanted everybody to see that my relationship was like great. And so I was silently suffering through the hardships of the relationship. But then if anybody looked at it, I was like, oh, everything is fine. Everything is great. So on the outside, I was making it look great. On the inside, I was slowly going under. I mean, way more depressed than I think I'd ever been, ever. And those times were like, I think the first real times in my life where a suicide or unaliving myself was an option. I just seriously thought like, what else? I mean, this is probably the worst of the worst, right? I felt like at the time, like my parents didn't want me. I wasn't good enough for the modeling industry. Like now I'm moving on to relationships and nothing I'm doing is right and everything I'm doing is wrong and it's all my fault. And it's just like, why am I here? So I was having those thoughts about it. And then my perfect world was just literally like crumbling as I'm trying to make it perfect, right? Like social media at that time had just started and I was not a social media person. I didn't have a MySpace or Black Planet, or Instagram wasn't even around at the time. But Facebook had just started and I didn't have one, but when I got to college, my friends were like, oh, you need to start one. And I was like, okay. And I always posted pictures of like happiness and like all these things that we do now on social media, right? We paint and create this picture perfect thing moments. And in actuality, we're really like screaming for help, dying on the inside. And for those that actually have happy moments, I am so very thrilled for you. I think now I can say I have those happy moments, but back then, definitely not. It was all a facade. I think again, it was just, this is my perfect world and this is how I'm gonna have everybody look at it. And it wasn't, any of that. I was slowly dying on the inside. And when I say depressed, I mean, I would sleep for days. I would not be motivated to do anything in college. I knew I had classes. I went to class. I came back. I slept. My friends, my roommates, or whoever was with me had to literally make me go eat, because I was just like, oh no, life is just, I can't do it. But I still had this like excessive need to, like, I don't know, be accepted. And that's why, like, that perfect picture was so important to me. But realistically, it wasn't happening at all. Even at that time, I had like multiple attempts to take my life. I think the very first one I had was in college. I was dating my college boyfriend. Again, it wasn't the best relationship, and I'll talk about that in a different pod. But I think it was just so hard. Whatever was happening was just extremely hard. And I think I was just really fed up with just the way life was going and how I wanted everything to be so perfect, but nothing was perfect. And I was just like, I'm done. So I took a bunch of stuff. Nothing happened except I got like a very bad stomach ache. I was by myself, and a friend of mine called. He was worried because he hadn't heard from me for a couple days, and I was just like so depressed. And he came over and was like, "Hey, come to my apartment. Like, let's just hang out." We did. He kind of helped me like get out of it, though I never talked about what was going on because, again, picture perfect me was like, everything's fine, everything's great. I'm just stressed and having a hard time with like school. And that was not the case. I was having a hard time with life. And then as I got older, there was another relationship I was in. Again, talk about that later. Where I was seriously contemplating it. And this time I was like, this is going to be a final thing. Like, there is not, like, last time I messed up and didn't do something right? But this time I was like, I'm definitely going to do it right this time. With that situation, it was a breakup, and it shouldn't have ever even really been a relationship. I think I was just super vulnerable at the time. It was like accepting of anybody to be in a relationship with, because I broke up with my college boyfriend, whom I was with my entire college history. And so many months after, this guy came along, and it was just like, he's nice to me. Okay, cool. And I was in that relationship. But that relationship was quite unhealthy as well. And towards the end of that relationship, when that finally ended, I was just like, okay, I cannot do anything right. Like, I'm done. And there was 2 people that called me excessively during that time. And that was my best friend and my mom. And I didn't tell them what I was going to do, but I think they kind of knew what I was going to do. So they were like calling and like, get up. And my best friend was telling me like, get off the couch, go take a shower, because he knew I was not, I'm sure he knew I was not taking a shower and not getting up. If I wasn't getting up, I was kind of stinking. So, he was just like calling. And I never like was like, he was like wanting to come over to my apartment. And I was like, no. My mom was wanting the same thing. I was like, I'm fine. And I just remember when right when I was about to do it, my mom calls me and is like, whatever is happening is, don't let something temporary be permanent, or whatever that saying is. And I was like, okay. And I never told her what I was going to do. She was just like, don't let this temporary pain be like like long lasting and permanent, make a permanent situation out of temporary pain. Maybe that's what she said. And I was like, okay. And she was like, I love you. I know you're going to get through this. I just want you to know that. And I was like, okay. And we got off the phone. So then I was like, okay, I don't know. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll sleep on it. And then tomorrow, if I'm feeling this way, I'm just going to do it. So I am trying to go to sleep. And then it's like the Holy Spirit sends me this like movie reel. That's what it was like for me. It was like a movie reel. And it was like all these different like highlights of what was going on in my life at that particular time, of like him like showing me grace and like showing me like what I was going through. Just in little snapshots. He's like, I've always been here. I've always told you. I've always shown you. I've always told you like what was going on. And like, he just sent snapshots of like life and what it was and what it could be. And I was just like, okay. And he was like, you're going to get through this. And I was like, all right. And so that next day, obviously I didn't, because I'm here. And, but either way, it basically was like that self pressure and the societal pressure of being perfect and not being vulnerable with anybody, that was like heavy on me, which led to the depression and led to the suicidal thoughts and attempts and the eating disorders and just all of these things that were quite unhealthy for me. It wasn't until I got into grad school that my professor called me out on not being vulnerable. And I was like, what? I'm pretty vulnerable. I was like, I'm open with people. I always said this. I was like, I'm an open book. You can ask me anything and I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you. And excuse me, I didn't realize until he told me that that's not what vulnerability was. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, what do you mean? He was like, no. He was like, what you are is like a perfectionist. And he was like, isn't it exhausting? There's like no true outcome. And he said it so casually that I was just like, what? I was like, I am a perfectionist, but I don't see it as a bad thing. Like, And like I was pouting. And he was like, he was just like, no, it's just stopping you from connecting to people. And I was like, what? So in my field, I have to connect with people kind of like instantaneously. I have to build relationships with them pretty quickly in order to help them. And I couldn't do that with trying to be perfect. And so we had to film ourselves in grad school of like just us talking to different people or our clients, quote unquote. I didn't realize how closed off I was actually until watching the film with him. I mean, we watched it in class and stuff, but we watched it in class and I went to his office hour, and that's whenever he talked to me about being a perfectionist. And cause I really didn't understand. And I was like, what is happening? Like, what am I doing? And he said that statement. He was like, being a perfectionist is exhausting with no true outcome. He showed me like how closed off I was. And when I watched the film, I was absolutely closed off. I was very uncomfortable. I was not genuine with myself. And that was strictly because I was trying to perform. I was trying to be perfect instead of just being myself. And that statement, the perfectionism is exhausting with no true outcome, has stuck with me literally since then. It was like, okay, so now my goal is not to be a perfectionist. Again, that's a goal. I'm still work in progress because I have my moments where I'm like, oh, it just needs to be this way. But my goal is just to be more vulnerable with people. And, as I talk to my clients, that's the one thing about me that I try to make like prevalent in my relationship with them, is that like I want to be like my authentic self and vulnerable enough to help them be vulnerable with me, because I don't think it's going to work unless that relationship is a trusted relationship. And in order to do that, I have to be vulnerable and show them that. So I basically said all of that to say that my need to be accepted and need to be cared for was like the driving force behind perfectionism, or the perfectionistic characteristics. I wanted that so bad, but then it goes way back to childhood and not feeling wanted. I didn't feel accepted and I didn't feel cared for. Even though I had people that cared for me, I think it was very different than my birth parents caring for me, which I will never know. But in my head, that's what it was. And I think that was like the driving force behind my perfectionism. And I think the things that have helped me try to overcome perfectionism, because again, it's a work in progress. It literally is like a daily decision to be like, okay, this is not that bad. Because I still have my moments where I'm like, oh, the house is not clean. It's not perfect. And I'm like, this needs to be here and that needs to be there and this needs to be there. And part of me has to realize like, okay, it's not going to be perfect. That's not realistic. There is literally only one thing that was ever perfect on this earth, and I am not him. Jesus literally was the only thing that was perfect, and I can't even be that at all. So why am I striving so hard to do something that's impossible? So I'm having to learn to be vulnerable, not only with myself, but with others, i.e., why hide and seek is here, and show self-compassion. I think those two tools will help like break barriers of perfectionism. So whenever I was she's like my mentor, my big sister, one of my longest and close friends, came to town. She does these things every time she comes to see me where I end up bawling like a baby. And this time it was about self-love. And she had this card, if I can find it, I saved it. And on the card, it was just like all this self-love, like affirmation type things. And how she does this all the time, I don't know. But I'm going to read the card. It says, so she folded them out and was like, just pick one. She kind of like shuffled them or whatever and was like, hey, just pick a card. And I was like, okay. And she was like, whichever one you pick is going to be the one that you need. And I was like, of course, great. So the one I pick is self-compassion. Now, when I was in therapy, self-compassion was like the hardest thing for me ever. My therapist had to like help me be compassionate toward my little baby self, my little self, my teenage self, my young adult self, even my adult self. And I mean, I was in therapy for 5.5 years. So like that was a process. So when I got this card, I was like, of course I did. Of course I got this card. So it says self-compassion at the top. And then it says, I'm deeply loved at my best and at my worst. And so my friend was like, what does that mean for you? And I was just like, oh, come on. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, what does that mean to you? And I was like, I'm deeply loved at my best and at my worst. And I was like, oh, please don't get teary. Please don't get teary. But I did. And I was like, I'm pretty accepting of loving me at my best. It's loving me at my worst that I have the hardest time doing. And I know that it is strictly from the fear of being judged. And with being judged, I think goes along with like that not being accepted, at least in my brain, of like, okay, if this person is like judging me, then they don't really accept me for who I am right now. So they have all this critiques about me, which means, oh my goodness, I'm not doing something right. And then there goes that perfectionist spiral, right? And I'm now learning to love me at my worst, even though I'm like my own worst critic. And I'm learning to be like, okay, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And like having compassion for the things I do that are maybe mistakes, or literally anything that I deem as negative. I'm learning to like accept it as a learning process or a growth tool than harsh criticism or critique. Again, like the harsh criticism and critique was like my whole life, basically. If it wasn't of myself, then it was from the modeling world, or from like not wanting to disappoint my adoptive parents because I didn't want them to give me away. So I'm just learning that, like, you know what? Life is about making mistakes. I'm going to make it in order to learn, and I can't grow if I'm not making mistakes. So being a perfectionist is something that's nearly impossible. It's actually quite impossible. So I'm learning to be more compassionate towards myself, hopefully. So that's it. I hope that I don't know, it struck a chord with somebody. But thanks for tuning in. I don't know what else I'm going to talk about next time. But I'm sure that something will pop up because I have lots of stuff to talk about. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.